Good afternoon. This is Real World News, which is a journalism program produced by the students at QUT. My name is Alex Durante. The rising currency of social media, particularly within legacy media, has left some journalists stumped. News isn't what it used to be. Now, instead of picking up the newspaper, we can scroll on Facebook or Instagram and get our daily dose of news that way. This new age of media sees conventional journalistic practices and innovative digital techniques transforming together. My guest today has termed this emerging genre social news. Dr Edward Hurcombe, welcome to the program and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Edward, you're a research associate here at QUT's Digital Media Centre and you're working on a really interesting project at the moment. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm a research associate here at QUT and I'm working on a research project led by Professor Axel Bruns that is studying misinformation and fake news on Facebook. So basically we've got a whole bunch of social media data going back to 2016 and we're kind of interested to work out from this data how far and how far fake news URLs were spreading. So
Yes.
these fake news URLs include, websites such as dodgy websites about conspiracy theories, but also kind of hyper-partisan news as well from websites like Breitbart. So we're basically trying to see what kind of groups and pages were spreading these Facebook URLs to get a sense of like the network of fake news on Facebook and see how big it is.
Yeah, and how big is it?
Currently we can't tell because we're still working on it.
Yeah.
So we still have, we're still going through the data, we've collected all of it, but we're still analysing it. But so far we can see, it's really interesting to see how, the network has consolidated.
Yes.
For example, there's lots of websites to begin with, but then after 4 years, some really big ones start to emerge and dominate.
Yes. Now, as interesting as misinformation and fake news is, we're actually going to be talking today about one of your earlier projects, which is a term you coined, social news. What is it?
So social news was me trying to find a term for those websites like BuzzFeed, Junkie, Pedestrian, that really started to gain popular in the early 2010s. Like there was just a proliferation of them.
Yeah.
And I sort of coined it social news because there's something that, they're not just on social media, but they're also making news kind of more conversational, kind of more informal, and seem to be kind of using the kind of conventions and vernaculars that, that we have, that people kind of converse through on social media.
Yes.
So that's what it was.
Yeah, and what sort of sparked it? Because I guess for me, looking at it, it's almost like the love child of legacy media and social media.
Yeah, it is that way, it is. I mean, they're kind of like, outlets can be different, but I was really interested in the sense of, people were saying BuzzFeed, Junkie, they're not news, they're not serious,
Yes.
They're not legitimate.
Yes.
And I was kind of like, from what I saw, I mean, that didn't really capture what I was seeing. Like, sure, there's a lot of, the classic, the listicle about pop culture. But also BuzzFeed and Junkie and Pedestrian would also seem to be reporting on serious news as well, in ways that seemed like accessible to a young audience.
Yes. And I guess that's a real benefit of it because, I mean, BuzzFeed, Junkie and Pedestrian, while they're not, the normal generic way we would usually convey news, it is something new and it is getting to the millennials and maybe the younger generations. But do you think that there are limitations? Because a lot of their articles, I'm scrolling on Facebook and it comes up, what kind of cake flavour am I?
Yeah.
And then the next one might be something on, a war happening.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's limitations there?
Oh, totally. And I mean, like, it's not the sense I was trying to say these will replace news.
Yes.
It's more that they can be seen as kind of legitimate kind of, element of our news media ecology, if that makes sense. So I think there are limitations. For example, like, if you're reporting on the war of Afghanistan,
Yes.
maybe don't use GIFs.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, I think that other social justice issues, for example, this was really big in the marriage equality campaign.
Yeah.
Like, they're reporting on that issue seriously, but they're using a lot of kind of GIFs to make it kind of get across, how hard that process was and how much pain that process caused.
Yes.
And so using GIFs and memes was a way of getting through that and also conveying it to the young audience. So in that case, like GIFs were appropriate.
Yeah.
But certainly, I mean, you can't do that kind of style for every topic and they have to be kind of appropriate.
Yeah, and do you think for most part they are appropriate, or do you think you have seen some misappropriation there where maybe they've used GIFs or emojis for something which is completely...
I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen more like, not so much inappropriate, but sometimes a bit more cringe.
Okay,
so,
yeah.
So
There's a lot of that out there.
Yeah, it's kind of like they try, because, especially as it become, as Gen Z becomes, millennials get older, Gen Z become the new young people.
Yes.
Sometimes, like, there's just a bit, the way that they use cringe seems a bit, the way that they use memes or GIFs to report on issues and to relate to young people sometimes feels a bit forced or cringe.
Yes.
I see more of that than I have seen examples of, kind of inappropriate way of reporting on war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess looking forward, particularly with legacy media, because I feel like this is the one that, is it going to adapt? Is it going to be completely monopolised by social news? How do you see the next decade playing out?
It's hard to tell because there seems to be the late 2010s seem to show like a collapse in social news.
Yes.
But most particularly in the US. So BuzzFeed famously kind of collapsed and closed most of its bureaus outside the US. And other sort of kind of social news outlets like Mike in the US also just kind of pretty much collapsed. It's still around, but has like a skeleton news crew. And that seemed to show that, maybe it was on decline. At the same time, Australia's been different. So Junkie seems to be just find its own kind of sustainable news model, seems to be accepted part of the news landscape, seems to be doing pretty okay. And whereas like Pedestrian got bought out by Nine, and now it's just like Safe, and it's even actually become a bigger part of their kind of young people news agenda than it was before. So it's kind of hard to tell in one sense, like maybe a collapse, but also maybe there's kind of like an institutionalization of social news as well.
And do you think it's kind of reflecting what's actually happening on more so like a political scale? Like when Trump was in power, that's probably why something like BuzzFeed, which was, a little bit more conversationalist and, not as...
Totally. Yeah, like, I mean, I think they got across that kind of... that feeling, that feeling of like, particularly for young people, about what the hell just happened. But also these social news outlets have been better able to, because they've always taken the internet seriously. They've also been able to better report on Trump and sort of like, I guess the alt-right as well. And these kind of, these things that stump journalists, like why are these fascists using memes? And BuzzFeed was really good at reporting why they were using memes, but also reporting like what Facebook could do about it as well.
Absolutely.
So in both those senses, they both were really good about the internet.
Oh, that's great. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to social news or any other thoughts you have?
Can I do a plug?
Yeah.
Well, I've got a book coming out based on social news.
Oh.
It's maybe next year. So whoever's watching this.
Yeah, I got a little bit of heat for reading your thesis. So I'm happy that you're plugging your book here. I think that's great. I'll read that one next.
But besides a plug, I also like just to add that one really important thing about social news is it breaks from objectivity. Right? And not that objectivity is necessarily bad, but sometimes the way that objectivity is practiced is that it kind of has this kind of balance of all viewpoints. This refusal to take a side. And I think that when reporting on social justice issues like racism, and reporting on the marriage equality campaign, and reporting on climate change, it's actually being balanced and refusing to take a side actually harms the accuracy of that reporting because you can't see what's going on. So for that reason, I hope that social news, by challenging objectivity and challenging like problematic notions of balance, hopefully that can, stay a thing.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we have time for today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Eddie.
Thank you. Likewise.
I'm Alex Durrani, and this is Real World News. See you next time.